Why do we call hard liquor spirits? This is not just a quaint linguistic quirk or poetic language. For thousands of years, across virtually every culture that has consumed alcohol, humans have recognized something profound and disturbing about what alcohol does to consciousness. It does not just impair judgment or lower inhibitions. It fundamentally alters who you are, releasing aspects of the psyche that remain hidden during sobriety. Ancient wisdom held that alcohol literally invites spirits to possess the drinker, and modern psychology has discovered that this metaphor captures a psychological truth more accurately than most people realize. Today we are exploring the unspoken truth about spirits in alcohol, why this substance has such power over human consciousness, and what Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, and other depth psychologists discovered about the relationship between alcohol and the hidden dimensions of the human psyche. Throughout human history, alcohol has been treated as a sacred and dangerous substance, one that opens doorways to altered states of consciousness. The Latin word for alcohol, spiritus, means breath or spirit, the same word used for the Holy Spirit in Christianity. The Arabs called distilled alcohol al-Kuhl, referring to a fine powder used to outline the eyes, suggesting something that allows you to see differently. These were not metaphors. Ancient peoples believed alcohol literally allowed spirits to enter the body and take control. In Greek mythology, Dionysus was the god of wine, ecstasy, and the dissolution of ordinary consciousness. His followers would drink wine and enter states of divine madness where normal social constraints dissolved and the wild, instinctual nature emerged. The Greeks understood that alcohol removed the civilized mask and revealed something more primal underneath. They both celebrated and feared this power, recognizing that what emerged could be divine inspiration or destructive chaos. Shamanic traditions around the world have used fermented substances in ritual contexts to facilitate contact with the spirit world. They understood that these substances lower the barriers between conscious and unconscious, between the ego and what lies beyond it. But they also recognized the danger. These substances were used in controlled ceremonial contexts with clear intentions and experienced guides, never casually or for mere pleasure. The spirits invited through alcohol could heal or harm depending on how the experience was held. Medieval alchemists saw distillation, the process of creating spirits from fermented substances, as capturing the essence or soul of the material. They believed they were liberating the spirit trapped in matter. This was both literal chemistry and symbolic psychology. The spirit released through distillation represented aspects of consciousness normally bound by the material limitations of ordinary awareness. To drink spirits was to ingest this liberated essence, with all the power and danger that implied. Carl Jung approached alcohol from a psychological rather than mystical perspective, but his conclusions were remarkably similar to ancient wisdom. Jung understood that the psyche contains multiple complexes, semi-autonomous ecological structures that have their own agendas and energies. The ego, your conscious sense of I, is just one complex among many. Others remain unconscious most of the time, but they are still active, influencing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors from beneath awareness. Alcohol, Jung recognized, weakens the ego's control over the psyche. It lowers the threshold between conscious and unconscious, allowing normally repressed complexes to emerge into awareness and take control of behavior. This is why people often say that was not me after drinking. They are partially correct. It was not their ego self. It was another aspect of their psyche that alcohol liberated from ego control. Jung would say that alcohol allows the shadow, all the aspects of yourself you normally repress or deny, to emerge and express itself. Jung had particular insight into alcoholism, because he worked extensively with Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Wilson sought Jung's help for a patient who kept relapsing despite treatment. Jung told Wilson something profound that became foundational to AA. The Latin phrase for alcohol is spiritus contra spiritum, spirit against spirit. The craving for alcohol is actually a misplaced spiritual craving, a thirst for wholeness and connection that the person is trying to satisfy through spirits, rather than through genuine spiritual development. Alcohol provides a temporary and destructive substitute for the transformation that the psyche actually needs. Sigmund Freud understood alcohol through his model of ID, ego, and superego. The ID contains all your primitive drives and desires. The superego is your internalized moral authority. The ego mediates between them and reality. Alcohol weakens both ego and superego function, allowing the ID to express itself more directly. This explains the disinhibition effect. The civilized restraints fall away and the raw desires emerge. What people call their drunk self is actually their ID self, normally kept in check but liberated by alcohol's effect on psychological defenses. Modern neuroscience has mapped exactly how alcohol produces these psychological effects. It enhances GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, which reduces neural activity and stressors. It inhibits glutamate, which normally keeps you alert and in control. It triggers dopamine release, producing pleasure and reinforcing alcohol-seeking behavior. It affects the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment, impulse control, and self-awareness. In essence, alcohol systematically dismantles the neural systems that maintain your normal psychological defenses and sense of controlled selfhood. Now here is the truth that nobody wants to acknowledge, but that every honest person who drinks recognizes at some level. When you drink, you are not just relaxing or having fun. You are deliberately compromising your ego consciousness, and inviting other aspects of your psyche to take control. You are, in the language of ancient wisdom, inviting spirits in. And here is what makes this dangerous. You do not get to choose which spirits answer that invitation. The following explanation reveals why this matters far more than most people realize, and why the psychological cost of regular alcohol use might be far higher than you think. Jung's concept of the shadow is essential to understanding the spirits in alcohol. The shadow contains everything about yourself that you have rejected, denied, or never developed. Your anger that you have been taught is unacceptable. Your intimate desires that you have been shamed for. Your ambition that conflicts with your self-image as humble. Or your weakness that contradicts your need to appear strong. All of this goes into the shadow, and it does not disappear. It remains active in the unconscious, waiting for opportunities to express itself. Alcohol is one of the most reliable ways to give the shadow those opportunities. This is why people do things while intoxicated that seem completely out of character. The character they show sober is only part of who they are. The rest is in the shadow, and alcohol lets it out. Someone who is normally gentle becomes aggressive. Someone who is normally reserved becomes intimately forward. Someone who is normally responsible becomes reckless. These are not random changes. They are the shadow asserting itself when ego control is weakened. The problem is that shadow integration, bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, needs to happen deliberately and consciously for it to be productive. When you do shadow work in therapy or through practices like active imagination, you are meeting these rejected aspects of yourself in a contained way where you can integrate them into a more complete sense of self. When alcohol releases the shadow, it bypasses consciousness entirely. The shadow acts, but you are not present to learn from it or integrate it. You are possessed by it rather than consciously engaging with it. This is why many people have a destructive relationship with alcohol. They are using it as a tool, instead of consciously integrating their shadow. The intoxicated self gets to express all the things the sober self denies, but nothing is learned or integrated. The same patterns repeat endlessly. The person wakes up with shame and regret, reinforces their repression of the shadow, builds up more pressure, and then drinks again to release it. This cycle can continue for decades without any psychological growth occurring. Viktor Frankl observed that addiction often represents a crisis of meaning. People consume to fill an existential void, a sense that general life lacks purpose or significance. Alcohol provides temporary relief from this meaninglessness by altering consciousness to a state where these questions feel less pressing. But this is purely avoidance. The existential questions remain unanswered, and each time you avoid them through alcohol, they become more difficult to face sober. The spirits you invite through alcohol are promising meaning but delivering only temporary escape. Alcohol also operates at the level of collective consciousness in ways that are rarely acknowledged. When groups drink together, they are collectively lowering their ego defenses and entering a shared altered state. The context can create powerful bonding experiences because people are relating from less defended, more authentic places. This is why alcohol is called a social lubricant. It temporarily dissolves some of the barriers between people. It also creates collective shadow expression. Collective groups can do things that none of them would do individually. The collective shadow emerges when individual ego control is simultaneously weakened in multiple people. The rationale explains disruptions after sporting events, confusion at bars, and the dangerous dynamics of intoxicated crowds. The collective loses its civilized constraints just as individuals do, and the results can be catastrophic. Emile Durkheim studied how societies regulate consciousness through ritual and social norms. He observed that alcohol consumption is carefully regulated in functional societies, precisely because of its power to disrupt both individual and collective consciousness. Cultures that integrate alcohol into ritual contexts, where drinking has spiritual or ceremonial significance, tend to have fewer problems with alcoholism than cultures where alcohol is consumed casually and recreationally. The difference is whether the spirits are being invited into a sacred container or being released without containment. Modern drinking culture, particularly binge drinking, represents the collective shadow expression without any containing ritual structure. Many drink to get drunk, deliberately seeking ego dissolution and disinhibition. This is a pseudo-spiritual practice, an attempt to access altered states and experience something beyond normal consciousness, but without any of the wisdom, preparation, or integration that genuine spiritual practices provide. The spirits are invited, but not respected, used but not understood. Social pressure around alcohol reveals collective shadow dynamics. In some instances, those who choose not to drink are often pressured, mocked, or excluded. Why? Because their sobriety holds up a mirror to the group's choice to alter consciousness. It raises uncomfortable questions about why the group needs alcohol to relax, connect, or have fun. The sober person's presence unconsciously challenges the collective rationalization for drinking, so they must be pressured to join or excluded to protect the group's defense mechanisms. What does psychological wisdom suggest about one's relationship to alcohol? First, radical honesty about why you drink. Are you drinking to enhance an already enjoyable experience, or are you drinking to escape, to numb, to access aspects of yourself you cannot access sober? If it is the latter, alcohol is not your friend. The spirits you are inviting are substitutes for the genuine integration your psyche needs. Second, understand that regular alcohol use inhibits self-relaxation, reinforcing the belief that alcohol is needed to connect. It is access to confidence, with psychological dependency. Next, develop alternative practices for accessing altered states of consciousness. This is what Jung meant by spiritus contra spiritum. The craving for alcohol is often a misplaced craving for transcendence, for getting beyond the limited ego self. Meditation, breathwork, dance, creative expression, time in nature, these can all alter consciousness in ways that promote integration rather than dissociation. They invite the psyche to expand. Also, support groups work for many because it addresses the spiritual dimension that Jung identified. The processes of psychological and spiritual transformation assist to develop a relationship to something larger than ego, which is what you were unconsciously seeking through alcohol all along. Moreover, consider periods of complete sobriety. A period of sobriety reveals which of your personality traits are genuinely yours, and which are the spirits that alcohol invites. This can be confronting, but also liberating. Here is the unspoken truth about spirits: when alcohol is consumed, you are engaging in a form of spirit possession, using ancient language, or shadow possession using Jungian language, or ego dissolution using neuroscientific language. All three descriptions point to the same reality. You are deliberately compromising your conscious control and allowing other aspects of your psyche to take over. This is not inherently wrong, but it is inherently powerful, and potentially dangerous, and treating it casually is psychologically naive. The ancients who called alcohol spirits were not being superstitious. They were being psychologically sophisticated. They recognized that this substance fundamentally alters consciousness, and that what emerges when normal consciousness is suppressed needs to be treated with respect and caution. The question is not whether you should never drink. The question is whether you understand what you are actually doing when you drink, and whether you are doing it consciously or unconsciously. Are you using alcohol to avoid psychological work or to facilitate it? Are you inviting spirits into your consciousness with awareness and intention? Many psychologists suggest that relationship to alcohol reveals your relationship to your own psyche, to the aspects of yourself you have not integrated, to the shadow you have not faced. If you found this content intriguing, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The spirits are about altered consciousness, whether you call them complexes, shadow elements, or neurochemical processes. The question is whether you will relate to them consciously or let them possess you unconsciously.